ISO, aperture, shutter speed. Who cares?
You shall not pass!
What the Today, we're gonna talk about the basics of the basics. The exposure triangle. The aperture, shutter speed, ISO. 3 things you always need to know no matter where you take the picture and of what it is. 3 things we're gonna talk about today. So, let's head to the couch, shall we? Alright. So, the basic premise of photography is that you press the shutter of your camera, light enters through a hole in your lens, gets chopped off into a nice little piece by your shutter, and then led onto the image sensor to be converted into a photo. Now what that photo will look like is entirely dependent on you, because it's you who controls the 3 parts of the holy triangle of photography. And those 3 parts are the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed. Let's start talking about the ISO. Now, ISO values denote how sensitive your camera is to light, or in other words, how much light your camera needs to give you a bright picture. Now, the only time I think about ISO values is when I'm shooting in low light situations. That could be indoors, that could be at night. Higher ISO values will lead to my camera being more sensitive to light. It will need less light to give me a bright picture. But the problem with higher ISO value is that the higher you go, the worse your image quality will become. Noise, grain, artifacts, worse colors, all these things will start to creep into your photo and make it very hard to edit after. So you definitely want to make sure that you stay within a reasonable range. So now you know about ISO. Great. What can you do with it? My answer would be nothing. Yet. Because there's 2 other ingredients in this whole exposure soup that we still need to dive into. And those 2 are super important because they directly affect what your picture will look like. I'm talking about the aperture and the shutter speed. Let's dive right in with the aperture. The aperture is the size of the hole that your lens makes as soon as you click the shutter. So you click the shutter, the lens makes a hole, and the size of that hole determines how blurry everything around your subject will be and how much light is coming in. The aperture is denoted by this weird number that has an F in front. So f2.8, f5.6, f16, what have you. Those numbers, the higher you go, the smaller the hole is. The smaller the number, the bigger the hole, the more blur you have. f2.8 is blurrier, has a bigger hole than f16, which is a tiny hole and has everything around your subject in focus. It's sharp, or we pros say, it has a big depth of field. Now the other thing that can control what your picture looks like in the end is the shutter speed. The shutter speed denotes how fast the shutter in front of your camera sensor opens, lets in light, and closes again to chop off that piece of light for the sensor. Now, to understand how the concept of shutter speed works, I want you to think of light as a collection of moments. So let's say I were to wave my arm real hard and took a photo of it. If I take that photo with a slow shutter speed, say half a second, lots of moments would enter the camera and my hand would be blurry. If we take the same photo with a fast shutter speed, my hand would be sharp. That is because the shutter was so quick, it let in only one precise moment. As you've probably guessed, freezing movement with faster shutter speeds is perfect for sports, animals, kids, anything really that moves fast. Slower shutter speeds are good in dark situations where you need to let in a lot of light into your camera, or you could also use it for cool motion blur effects. So, now we've covered all parts of the exposure triangle. And now it's time to go straight into recap time. Number 1, ISO. The ISO determines how much light your camera sensor needs to give you a bright photo. Number 2. The aperture determines how much light you let in through that hole in your lens, and also how much blur there is around your subject. Lastly, the shutter speed determines also how much light you let into your camera. But very important, it also determines the degree to which you freeze a movement. All three of these things work together to give you the right exposure. Guys, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it big time. I included a free cheat sheet PDF for you in the description. You can download it. If this video helped you, give it a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing, subscribe to my content. That would be absolutely amazing. So, I'll see you then, and have a good life.